research series. Welcome to Anita. This is terrific. We could not be more excited to have you here today. For those, not in the know, Anita came from Laramie, all right, there back in the day, Chico, where she completed her doctorate work in economics at the University of Wyoming, undergraduate work at Lahore in Pakistan, interested in environmental, natural resource governance issues, especially as they relate to economic growth and development. So very much in our bailiwick. And today, going to be talking about local politics, political structures, and water policy in California. We're still planning this water governance roundtable as well, Anita. So would love to talk with you. It's not going to be till the spring, but this reminds me that we got to get that on the calendar. So we can talk about that after. But thank you so much for being here. We couldn't be more thrilled. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. I've been here 2 weeks and I'm going to be here for another 2 weeks. Thank you so much to the workshop for having me. Thank you so much to the staff, especially Megan, Marie, Anna. I've been really a pain in some ways. You guys are just awesome. And it's just really nice to be here and just absorb some of that history. Thank you for the conversations. So I'm planning to speak for about 20 minutes. If I go slow, maybe 23 minutes. But I'm really here to get your feedback, suggestions. So this talk today is just to set it up. We don't have a paper yet, but hopefully we'll have it soon. So today, hopefully I'll just set up the problem and find it interesting. Okay. So a little bit about me. I thought I'll introduce myself in a specific way to kind of get you a perspective on where I'm coming from. I was really trained in environmental and resource economics, which at that time I thought was source economics. And in retrospect, I mean, as I grew after my PhD, I realized it was neoclassical in source and environmental economics. And there's a lot more to the world than I saw. A big surprise, those of you doing your PhDs, that's just the beginning of learning. And then after my PhD, I had a great opportunity to work on local irrigation commons work. And that's where I really discovered governing the commons. Ostrom's amazing and her colleagues' amazing work on local commons. And it was really useful to think about. It was a really useful framework to organize like the chaos or the complexity of the real world. So I used that and that went very well. More recent work that we've done with my colleagues at Chico and in California is on water markets. It's a really fascinating way to think about water policy, but it also some really interesting things out. This work that we've been doing really looks, and I think that's what you're going to find the common theme. My interest is the distributional aspects. Who gets how much and why is what I'm really interested in. And some of the work we've done has shown that water markets can really have different impacts on who you are, where you were. So it was really my good fortune to meet Bill Blomquist at an event in San Francisco. We happened to be sitting next to each other at a table situation like this, and he planted the seed back in 2019. Come visit. And here I am many years later during my sabbatical. Really happy to be here. Thank you so much. I'm loving being part of the IAD once a week seminar, learning a lot, because I've been kind of teaching myself stuff on my own. It's really nice to be connected to the root of this work. So thank you. So what I thought I would do is to start with, and maybe you are going to appreciate this or not, like a really 100,000 foot view of the conceptual background in economics. Or natural resource econ has been really preoccupied with this one question. What is the optimal harvest rate of a stock for resource, right? It could be water, fisheries, forest, coal, oil, non-renewable, renewable. What is the optimal harvest rate? What's the best? And optimal means for economists, profit maximizing. In this case, we call it profit rent. So the difference between price and cost. So you want to maximize that. And that's why for economists, the tragedy of the commons is the tragedy because the rents go to zero. we're not that concerned about who got the rent or who's going to get the rent once it gets recovered. So, and of course, we want to think about restricting appropriation. There's been a tremendous amount of intellectual energy spent on adding the complexity of the resource, how it kind of moves, variations on time horizons, preferences, discount rates, of course, role of markets, right? So it's a thick literature in this domain, like looking from a 10,000-foot view. But this literature, I think, is quieter, much quieter on some of the questions that I think are really interesting and important, such as, if the transition from open access begins, forget about the optimum second, the best, whatever that is. Actually, it's funny. Yesterday, Dan said during the IAD 673, I don't know if my fellow attendees remember, we should give up all hope that we'll ever get to the first best or something. I was like, okay. So forget about the optimum. So, okay. So let's say the transition begins for some reason and the rents increase. I think it's really important to think about how do they get distributed amongst users, amongst the resource appropriators. So again, the distributional outcome of optimal arrangements, even if they're not optimal, whatever next arrangement that is, what is the distributional outcome? Who decides these rules? And specifically, I'm interested in under what conditions can there be opportunities for new players to be part of the table discussion to design those rules. And I'm going to talk specifically about that in the context of California. How do the new appropriation rules as we transition correlate with other related and pre-existing institutions? So history matters, right? So do we see things get replicated or do we see opportunities for improvements in equity? And of course, the link between distribution and efficiency. Does the redistribution affect the transition, the paths that you could take? And that's more of a comparative institutional story. So these are some of the things I was interested in. The Commons Lit, just kind of nodding to this literature, really rich empirical literature on the diversity of governance arrangements. But maybe I'm wrong here. I'm not an expert at all. I'm still reading and absorbing it. But I sense that it's also a lot quieter on whether and how power inequalities affect the transition. To what extent history matters. And there was a really nice review. This last is a quote from Arun Agarwal's article in the Annual Review of Environment and Resources, which I thought it was worth quoting. Power, values, equity, and justice are receiving deservedly greater attention from scholars of sustainability and commons, but much remains to be done. Seems like there is a common theme here about distributional impacts. All right, so let me take you to groundwater and this is a fascinating topic. I could go on and on, but I'm going to really try to kind of focus our attention to these questions so we could kind of frame big questions in this particular context. So at the aggregate level, like groundwater is very important to it. So in a typical year, on average, which is a very bad way to put it, we use about 30% of water source comes from California. But when it's a dry year, which is happening more and more often, because climate's changing, it's more than half of the water comes from groundwater. An arid region, not like here. I was just so happy to see the rain here. I know you guys are probably quite sick of it, but it's just so nice to see the rain here because we don't get that much rain that often, especially in the summer months. So there is a temporal variation, and then there is a spatial variation. Like some areas are always going to be on groundwater. There's an institutional reason for that. There could be a geographic reason for that. And some areas are always going to be on surface water. So this average is really masking a lot of heterogeneity over time and across space. But just to kind of give you an idea, groundwater is really important. And I think it's fair to say that for, calling it open access is a fair characterization. So it's been de facto open access, even though overlaying groundwater users have to show beneficial and reasonable use. But in the arid region, especially for agriculture, there's been a lot of pumping. Levels are going down, so it's de facto, it has become open access. With some exception, of course, of adjudicated basins, which by the way was the subject of Lynn Ostrom's PhD work, and then Bill Blomquist also followed up on that. So that's a very small percentage of groundwater basins. Please interrupt me if there are any clarification questions. Just to take you forward, this is an image I picked up from Nature Communications article that came out recently, which I think makes the invisible, because groundwater is hard to have any emotions about underneath the ground, right? But I think this makes the invisible visible in a sense. It shows you how much loss there has been overall in the California groundwater basins. That's just a lot of water that's just gone because of overpumping. And you can see that, let's see. The recovery does happen in these really wet, right? The recharge does recover. Overall, the trend is still going down. Why does it matter? The basic costs, increased pumping costs for the existing users, loss of water supplies and droughts, water quality gets degraded. There's a link between surface water and groundwater. We want to think about these two separately, but they're not separate. Right? They are interconnected. Streams can dry up. Of course, if you're next to the coast, salt water can move in because the groundwater is down. Your eyes can get salty, and now you can use them for irrigation or whatnot. You have to spend a lot of money to keep that up. And I don't know how many of you have seen that picture. Seen that picture? You've seen it? So I thought this again does a really good job of making the invisible visible. That's Mr. Joe Poland. He was a USGS geologist, and he spent his entire life doing systematic measurements of how the ground was sinking year after year after year after year, and then decides to take this picture in 1977. Can you see the mark of 1955? You see the mark of 1925? Done the measurements in advance. He put those signs up and he takes the picture. He's showing that's where the ground was in 1925. That's where the ground was in 1955. This is where the ground is today. And subsidence, this is land subsidence. This is when you suck the water out of the ground. It just kind of goes down. So obviously the infrastructure loss, but also you can't bring it back. The storage capacity of the aquifer is gone forever. So that's a tremendous loss. And that's happening in a big way in many areas. He took this picture on the west side of Fresno County. I'll show you where it is on the map in a second. All right, so finally the state decides to really put some teeth in the policy. This is what my research is about, or it's going to be driven by this law. Just call it SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, passed exactly 10 years ago in September, which is a great time to start studying it because some of these institutions have come forward now. This was really a mandated collaboration. So groundwater users within each subbasin were required to come together and form what is called groundwater sustainability agencies. You're now required to do it, come together, form a GSA, and the state would tell you where the subbasin boundary is. So that technical information was provided. These GSAs are going to be responsible for developing and implementing plans. And these plans must achieve sustainability by 2040. So this was a really path-breaking law. And the deadline was given 2020 if you're in a really bad shape, 2022 if you're in bad shape, but not as bad. So 2014, the bill comes through. You have 5 years or 7 years. Come up with a plan, how you're going to end this. So just to there's a lot of complexity, but these were the 6 measures of sustainability. All of the bad effects need to be reined in. Subsidence, quality, overdraft. You need to show progress. Each basin's GSAs need to show a way forward, how they're going to make progress and avoid these 6 undesirable effects. And there are measurements and metrics. And where does it apply? 515 overall groundwater basins in California. All of the blues here. But all of these blues are not the same. The state designated 94 of these 515 that were medium or high priority. Right? So the oranges and the yellows, which you can see somewhere here, mostly in the Central Valley. Some are there, so this stuff is not that, it's kind of low priority. And then 21 of them are the critically overdrafted. These are the ones that have to submit the plans by 2020. You gotta move faster, because you're in worse shape. Questions so far? We got a lot of data. I'm gonna be interested in all 94. And why do these 94 important? Like this covers 96% of the groundwater. About 90% of the. This is where the people are, this is where the pressure is, this is where facts are. Okay. So this happens, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. History matters. So I'm interested in specifically the institution of districts. Right? These districts were long-standing, in some cases, very powerful institutions that have been managing surface water for decades, in some cases more than a century. Right? So what are districts? These are institutions that provide surface water-based related services. Sometimes they'll have a reservoir, they definitely have canals and pumps and all that infrastructure. And these services are provided to landowners within these boundaries. In the Western US, districts are the predominant structures. I mean, this is an arid region. You need irrigation to grow. So you need to solve that common pool resource problem. And how do you pool finances and how do you enable that boundary to kind of pay? So these districts emerge in the entire Western US, including California, for all the surface water irrigation problems. So in California, 66% of irrigated acreage is off-farm water. So you need infrastructure. And there's a lot of research on why they emerged. Even Eleanor Ostrom's early work has talked about the district. Okay. These are powerful agents in some areas in shaping water policy in the state. And when we were doing the water market work, it was very clear that they're different from people and farmers outside districts because they're connected to the conveyance infrastructure, right? Which is what gives them water from the reservoir, and they can sell water out of basin. So that conveyance infrastructure kind of puts them in the network. So if you want to think about on the grid and off the grid kind of thing.
Question,
Yeah.
when were those districts set up and how are they set up?
So the law that enabled them passed 1887, the Irrigation Act. And then there is a staggering of them showing up in different parts of California all the way till 1950s. Even in early 1960s, but the bulk of it happened in the first part of the 20th century.
So, I mean, who set them up? Was this a government job or local officials?
Local, I think it was very much of an emergence of a local landowners coming together and saying, we want to be a district. Which is exactly how, by the way, the GSAs are coming about. We want to be a GSA. The 10 of us, we've decided we're going to speak for this area. Going to be our land, and once we become a district, we can raise revenues, we can borrow money, we can sell bonds. We have a board that governs us. So it's a really local government, like a special purpose local government. That's a big question. Any other? And okay, I'll talk about some of this later. Okay, so pictures again. I'm a really visual thinker, so I was drawing this on Word, so very clunky, but hopefully it communicates some interesting issues. So this is pre-Sigma. County, the yellow box, right? You have districts, which now I think looks like a Christmas tree. So that's not the intention. The green triangles are districts. Right? So the districts are managing all irrigation, water-related services within the borders. It's kind of like a sovereign. County has nothing to do with it. Right? This is the district, and the county is in charge of everything else. And then 2014, if you guys are in a basin. If you guys, this is good. This is all in a district. Clean, perfect. We already know each other. This could be messy. This could be messy. Right? So all of the users within the yellow, the blue have to kind of become a GSA, GSP, with a plan to avoid all these undesirable results. You have 5 years or 7.
Just to clarify, so these circles were created by the state in the 1980, no, 2000.
There is some history to it, but the Sigma really clarified it.
Okay,
Sigma said, this is the basin and now you have to manage it. The basin boundaries there was some sense of them. But the mandate that now you need to collaborate with Sigma. And then there was a long conversation, 3 or 4 years with basin boundary modification. Like, all right, let's move it a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, an inch here, a foot there. But more or less, these were the basin boundaries.
was there no resistance from the existing district? Okay.
You think?
Yeah.
Yes, there was and that in itself is a really interesting process to observe, and yeah, absolutely. Is Megan in my basin? Is Megan out? Yeah. So new administrative boundaries, okay? Now, so what I'm gonna do now in the next picture, I'm gonna just take a screenshot of this particular basin, try to understand the challenges to kind of help us frame the question that I want to frame, okay? So the next picture is just that. Who's in the basin? Right? So one is those 2 districts, right? The green triangles showing up. And the other neighbors that have shown up could be domestic well users. It could be a city or a municipality, groundwater user. It could be groundwater dependent farmers. So let's think about these for a second. So the district is surface water dependent. Doesn't mean the farmers don't have wells. They could have pumps to use groundwater to surface water supplies. Totally, they're dipping in groundwater as well. The domestic well users, very shallow wells. Not a big groundwater user, but they're very sensitive to quality. This is a typical rural water supply in the country as a whole in the US. They have their own wells. These are really shallow wells, and in times of drought, by the way, there's a little side fact, these are the first ones to go dry. And in the last drought, we had the county shipping them in tanks. The wells had gotten so dry. Literally, it was a situation I was like, this is what I've seen in Pakistan and Africa, or drinking water supply, so it's being shipped out. Yes, they get dry really fast. They could have, the municipality could have a deeper groundwater well. They might be a little bit drought. They might be a little bit more immune to the drought conditions, but that's also groundwater use. And then we have groundwater dependent farmers, and out there, they have their own wells, could be deeper than domestic wells. And now this community, this newly formed neighborhood has to organize itself. So what is the governance possibilities frontier? I picked up this word recently from a reading Don assigned us. Each distinct group could form its own GSA. The law allows it. As many GSAs as possible, but you all need to come together, make a plan. You all come together and make one GSA, which is it also happened in some basins. Long, maybe there was more social capital there already. It's a different, but this is exactly what you want to study. They all could come together, you could form their own GSA, any combination of the above. Everything is possible, and now we know what has happened in each basin, so we could kind of actually, and there's been some work published on collaboration basin. You're gonna make it really simple, intuitive. All right, so in this context, the research that we're pursuing, hopefully making progress on, what conditions basin governance structures are dominant? The green triangles. What advantage? Because those districts have an advantage of being organized for decades before. They already have a governance board. Some cases, they may already be studying their groundwater resources, right? These communities out there, they're new to this administrative structure. And so are we seeing domination? We need to define what domination is, but the second question is, are variations in those governance structures that we are observing now related with how they're choosing to allocate that scarce groundwater amongst users? At the end of the day, it's about, hey, cut back on pumping, remember? Cut back on There's no two ways about it, especially if you're in those orange basins. So who's cutting back? It's like a musical chair. Chairs are getting pulled out. I guess. So how do you allocate that scarcity? Who's at the table? Are districts more so on the table? Are they more equal than others? And how are the rules that are showing up, beginning to show up now? GSPs are not really showing yet what they're gonna do, but they've said something about this is how we might do it. From taxes to permits to allocations to irrigation efficiency subsidies. They're beginning to make some noises about what they're doing. This is what me setting up the problem. So we have a lot more slides here, but depending on questions or suggestions, I might show. This is where I'm going to stop talking.
Well, first off, congratulations. That's terrific work. And yes, the floor is open for comments, questions, devastating criticisms, no doubt.
Kind of started with students.
Starting with students, like a student at heart, Mike, right? But are there any students that would like to kick things off?
We labeled
Are you okay? I don't wanna put you on. Yeah, I'll check. Yeah, I don't see anybody online or anything. So yeah, Mike, go ahead, man. Yeah, kick us
Yeah,
off.
I'm still a student. I mean, I'm
That's
still.
right. We're all
learning things, you know, I just, I'm not getting graded for it anymore. Or giving grades. It's part of, nice both ways.
That helps a lot.
So on this sustainability plan, does the state offer any sort of, I don't know, list of what are possible components of possible policy instruments
We
that
gave
could be put in those plans?
So the plans, there were some components of the plans that the state did announce. We need to see these 5 or 6, I forget the number of components.
But are those goals or policies?
Well, they need to decide, the GSPs needed to decide measurable targets themselves, how to measure them, how to assess them. But the state did give guidance on what the essential components of those plans have to be, and that correlated with the 6 undesirable results. Of course, let me go back to this picture. How those 6 undesirables affect each basin is different, right? Some basins really have groundwater quality issues. Some basins have a lot of the coast, they have saltwater intrusion issues, which is not an issue up here. So by the way, this is up here, Chico. The Poland picture was taken around here somewhere, the subsidence issue. So depending on where your baseline conditions were, you had to show how you were going to make progress in yours. The state did evaluate the plans based on the initial guidance it gave on essential components they wanted to see, but it was left to the GSPs to come up with exactly what to do.
One other question along the same lines. What if they didn't do anything about this? What's the or else?
It's a great question. Spoken like a true political. What's the stick? I anticipated that. I was like, I'm not going to use that in my 10
Stick here.
What's the stick? So here you go. So this is as of Jan 2024. Greens are the approved. You think about taking a class and pass, no pass.
Mhm.
Greens passed. The purples, okay, fix this part of the paper and then we'll pass you. And the blue ones, and notice all blue ones are in the critically overdrafted basins. So what was the backstop? If you don't manage your basin yourself, state's gonna come in. We'll manage it for you.
I thought it'd be something like that.
And I think the conversations Bill and I have been having, it's fascinating because people who were studying as Sigma came through, it was really an interesting thing to observe. And if they're gonna do it, are they gonna really wield the stick? Did. So if you follow up on what's happening right now, the state has come in into some of these basins, the state has come in. So the state is wielding the stick. That's a great question, yeah.
Anna, did you have?
No.
Okay, so Gustavo and then Brian?
But I think
Brian first?
Brian was first.
Brian,
Yeah,
go ahead,
somebody
man.
was first.
We'll go to Gustavo. Did we not hear you,
Gustavo,
Brian?
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I was unclear. Okay, so first, very nice, clear.
maybe Gustavo, why don't you go? Okay, Brian, we're gonna work on the volume here in the
Oh, okay,
room.
sure.
Okay, I'll go and then when that's fixed, we.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So I don't know much about water, but my impression every time that I hear a paper on water in California, it's more or less the same. So I always come into the same question and then I never get some kind of a.
Today is the day. Today is
Answer.
the day you're gonna get the answer.
That's it.
So if you go and apply governing the commons type of thing, you say, well, the starting point is you know, these guys managed to avoid at least part of the tragedy of the commons, no? And then it's all, so you don't need to privatize the resource, you don't need to come, a government agency doesn't need to come and take over. The community will find its ways, okay? And then, okay, good. This is an example in which the tragedy of the commons is a much better model, no? So so it's because that's what is happening, no? So the obvious question is why?
That's a great question.
So essentially, it's so what is going on about either California water or the combinations that essentially governing the commons doesn't work. And I know that Eleanor considered failed cases of governing commons in the book, so it's not that it's completely new, but still I think we don't have like super clear ideas of why these cases are not failing. And I think what they're observing right now, if the governments, so the government of California plus local governments, they are essentially saying, well, enough is enough, so I will intervene, okay? And then they go from, I'll give you a nudge, so you start doing something to, well, guys, I will take over if you don't coordinate on some kind of reasonable agreement. And then it seems that what they're observing is not even with that expected stick, you see the governing the commons taking off. So what is going on essentially? No, so
You're absolutely right. I think, and this is a question that of the 16 others that I want to pursue, I just showed you 2. One question that I've always had is, why is it productive? How? I mean, one question, like if I could refine your question even more, is why was it worse in some ways? Others? Right? Why was these what's going on here? This is where the subsidence is the worst. This is where pockets of poverty amongst the farm worker communities are much worse. I mean, that's a part of California you don't see on posters. That's where the domestic wells go dry. It's where the hubs of some of these injustices are. How come this is worse here than? It's a really good question, and you know, it's kind of obvious, but I think it hasn't really been answered well. You know, I have some hunches based on the knowledge and what I've been observing over the years. I don't think it's been answered well. And I think the reasons that led to this are going to be correlated to the outcomes we're going to see now. We're beginning to see already that they're still not, it's beyond the path of U-turn.
just one follow up on this. So you may think that originally part of the problem is that they couldn't specify the boundaries of the resource because they really didn't know where the basin was. But now we are observing the government is providing that service. They are served, so they are giving you the locations of the basin.
Which has been the role of California's state Department of Water Resources throughout informational measurements.
They're checking some box of governing the commons for you. This is the limits of the resource, and it's still not happening. But that's interesting because it tells you that something that is failing, it must be something else. Probably it's not that they were not able to limit the resource, no?
This is information to you and me. They knew this,
They knew that, okay.
right? This is like the state's now putting this on the websites. I mean, I've been working in water for where it seems. And since Sigma passed and a couple of other laws passed, a lot more data just came online. Something that we were collecting ourselves because there has been a reluctance to share immense data. Now with the satellites, a lot of that bottleneck has been avoided. So this information is becoming more public, and now with Sigma, and Sigma is not like a big bang moment, actually. It seems like it is actually a continuity of the state nudging and carrots. Do it this way, we'll assist you technically, do it this way, subsidies, incentives, this. Now, this is a lot more. If you don't do it, come in, what you're observing, and you're absolutely right. What were the reasons? I mean, when I really try to throw some darts at the answer, gains from pumping just so high. Like in the last 2.5 decades or so, so many orchards have been planted. This is the story of international trade. How much China's growth and Middle East's growth and how much demands for almonds, walnuts, so strong. It was just not, I mean, the discount rates became really, really high. Put it this way, because the price from even if for multi-million-dollar investment, putting an orchard, remember, is a permanent crop. It's not like something you irrigate this year, you don't irrigate in the fall. You gotta irrigate it. It's a multi-million-dollar permanent tree. So the returns from just even if you harvest it for 5 years is so high. There's a demand for those. You look at the nut prices that we've been at those. It was just not worth it to worry about.
Just one comment there, and then we can go with Brian.
That's like one little piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, but was it another way of seeing exactly the same things, that the value of controlling the tragedy of the common is even higher? So essentially, if what you are doing with this resort is not so valuable, what are your incentives to fix the problem? But now you are telling me we are doing things that are extremely valuable. So probably the incentive to fix or the net benefits of solving partially the problems are even bigger, no?
Would be even bigger.
And that's what should matter for the solving the collective action problem.
But remember, not everybody can be part of the group. People have to be, it's musical chairs, like half the chairs have to go. Who gets to stay? Who gets to stay and still grows those almonds? Depending on which part of California it is a real question. I think that's why I was so interested in. Of course, not everybody can keep pumping. And this is what we're seeing in real time. My colleague Steve is here today. I don't know if he's here, but he's talking to farmers who are literally reporting that the bank is fusing them because their property is worth less under Sigma. Unless you can show surface water rights in some areas. So this is literally like a really interesting time to observe farmland market switch. No water, so there's no value to the land. Who has been exited, who has been without water, and who's in is a really important.
Yeah,
Brian, do you want to try again?
Yeah, okay.
Steve's
Can you
here.
hear me?
Steve can talk about,
Steve came in.
Steve can talk
Can't
about
hear.
the market. Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, Anita.
Oh, there he is.
Okay, we
So Steve can chime in and to tell us about the land values.
So let me add that
Can you hold
Turn the
on
volume up.
louder? One more time.
okay. Is this better? Can you hear me?
Try again.
Can you hear me?
Now he's muted. And so what's-
Could you turn the volume up on your microphone, maybe?
Okay,
There you go.
Success.
Good.
okay. I didn't do anything, but so There is a symposium coming up December 6th at Fresno State University, where I'm located. It's in the heartland of this Sigma territory Anita's been talking about. And this symposium will bring together ag real estate experts with some of the farmers and farmer groups to talk about the current status of loans to farmland owners and just farmers in general, and what are the prospects. And Anita, I think I mentioned to you at a recent Sigma event at UC Davis, I met one of the reporters for the California Farm Bureau, and what he reported to me or asked me is that he's heard that of banks not making loans to farmers and farmland owners based on the dismal prospects of production under Sigma. And so I shared that out with our friends with the Punjabi Growers Group and a bunch of our GSA leader friends, as well as Paige Gilligan, with the risk management group. And they all had different takes on that issue. They didn't agree with this reporter from the California Farm Bureau. And so I compiled those responses and shared with him. And he's developing a kind of long range report on this. In other words, the effect of Sigma on farmland values now and in the future. Hopefully that connects with some of what you were mentioning.
Thanks, Steve. I was thinking of you and
Okay, Brian, the mic is yours.
Okay, good. Very nice presentation of the issues. I think basically I want to give you a chance to talk some more about how you're conceptualizing the issue and then the relevant, perhaps multiple methods you're using. You mentioned some hunches, but in that last slide, you just used the word correlated, and you've also used that word in talking about it. So is this just something you're going to generate some data set and have a bunch of correlations and find some of them significant? Or do you actually have some hypotheses or hope to come up with some? Or do you have a particular model or theory of change or ideas about tracing processes and so on in terms of what approaches you're taking to understanding what's going on? So I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
thank you for pushing me here. So can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So for the first question, I don't know if I have put it on the slide. There we go. So for the first question, I think right now we're at the stage of collecting data in the governance structures. Some of them are kind of easy to find. Some of them are very hidden. So districts, I think overall are some of the least well understood aspects of how water actually gets managed in California. So I have some leads on where the data are. So yes, in answer to your question, I'm really at the data finding stage. And I think I want to let the data tell me exactly what kind of regression analyses and if possible, if we have some natural experiments in the data. I don't know yet. So I think depending on what we find, but right now I'm definitely at the stage of finding governance structure data for basins, which is easier because it's all online, but districts are hidden. Number of GSAs, what's the board size, what's the who's on the board, what are the voting rules, what are the veto thresholds? So kind of put that all together. Of course, those are governance outcomes based on control variables, and that's not that hard to find based on GIS and actual tabular data. Land use, groundwater conditions, infrastructure conditions, surface water rights. So, I mean, I want to look at the data before I say this is my exact hypothesis or this is my exact model.
If it's okay to follow up a bit,
Mhm.
I'll say that sounds like a very inductive approach. And as you're probably aware, there are alternative ways of thinking about that, including that what is ostensibly just looking at the data, there are all kinds of kind of theory and concepts and such implicit in what you consider data and what things actually have had data produced for them. And so that may be something worth considering. And more specifically, as I think it was Gustavo mentioned, Lynn's work and Bill Blomquist's work actually also does look at failure cases and has a basis for saying, okay, these are some of the reasons that some basins kind of got their act together and others didn't. And even under Sigma, their analysis may be more from a political science or other, sociological and anthropological perspective of trying to understand, okay, this question of, are the existing surface water districts going to try and, or dominate, and what would be the reasons or what not? And then Sigma itself built in a bunch of things to try and facilitate better informed and more inclusive processes. And there's already some work about the limitations and shortcomings of that. So I would challenge a bit on this. Oh, I just want to look at the data approach as opposed to, it may be quite important to get a bit more conscious about, okay, what are you actually considering as the possible variables, the possible relationships that may be going on here? Okay, so stop there.
Definitely worth thinking. I think I would reach out to you, know how to reach out to you. Maybe
Yeah,
I'll.
well, Bill knows infinitely more than I do about this, as do a bunch of the other people researching
Yes.
Sigma.
Yes, absolutely.
I just find it fascinating also.
No, I totally appreciate it. I think I just know that there are some serious obstacles in front of me getting some of that data. So I think I'm just solving that obstacle first. But I think that's a really good comment on being a little bit more mindful in exactly what the hypotheses would be before the data shows up.
Yeah, okay, and okay, I will at least go this far, and maybe you're doing it again. There's also just a bunch of stuff of interviewing some decision makers, which these days you can do it over the phone and Zoom, or go to like the conferences mentioned and so on. And that kind of qualitative experience and the perceptions of knowledgeable people can, kind of help triangulate what you get. You can think about with more quantitative data and be very useful.
It's okay. I know, so my mom's part of our Watershed Foundation in Indiana. I know it's a little different, the water rights situation here. But I was wondering if there were nonprofit organizations take like the conservancy approach. They have any?
There are several nonprofits. Two of them are really well known. That have taken on the issue of how. See if I have that picture up. This one, how these domestic well users, their rights are being protected. And they can be very articulate, be really powerful voices at the table, speaking for them. The little guy. So that's one of the big ones I know of. And if you notice the 6 undesirable results, I mean, they have not taken away the whole broader beneficial use language, which it includes environmental uses. That's definitely part of the equation. It's not just for agriculture or drinking. They're part of the equation as well. Andre?
You first? Yeah, she had first.
Anna.
So there's the list of the undesirable results, and is there the opposite things that they want to see? Or this is just the criteria?
Avoid this, avoid this, avoid this, yeah.
And so all of the basins that failed the same, they all tried the same things, or that's something that you still need to determine? Like,
they failed for different reasons. Like their plans did not show any measurable paths, measurable metrics, how are they going to actually cut pumping?
so they tried different things. So
Yeah. I mean, what's that first sentence of, what is it, War and Peace? Happy families and unhappy families. Or unhappy families are the same, or look for the results slide. thinking of that line. Yeah, there you go.
That was the
So,
opening of War and Peace. They said each family's unhappy, but they're unhappy in their own ways.
there we go. Thank you, Steve. Knew I could count on you. So I think that's the diversity going on here. And again, I'm not super familiar with the weeds details on exactly what did this basin do and this basin do, but bottom line was they didn't show their sustainability plans. And sometimes the GSA couldn't come together effectively. Agree on the same sustainability plan, who's going to do the cuts and how they're going to maintain, not make subsidence any worse. How they're going to protect the groundwater quality, how they're going to protect the groundwater dependent users. They weren't showing how they were going to get to avoid the 6 undesirable results.
Is there a reason that the information is so difficult? I mean, is there incentive for anyone to obscure this information, or is it?
The plans?
Yeah, and
Plans
what
are online. Plans are online, and each one of them, and if there's multiple GSAs in a basin, they often are. That's thousands of pages of text. So those are online. It's just, I just don't know off the top of my head exactly what each one of those basins did differently. But this is all online. It's public information. No, it's not hard to obtain at all.
I think it's just a clarification question. I'm trying to visualize where these actors meet. You know, how can they talk together? It's like there is strictus, there's the domestic one. The domestic needs association or.
Really good question.
So I'm trying to visualize this.
That's a really good question. I don't know if anyone of you noticed the timing here. 2014 it passes, 15, 16 is like everybody's like, gonna get stuck in lawsuits, it's never gonna come through. Something happens in 19, 20, 21. Anyone remember what that was?
Pandemic.
Did. Right around the time when the deadlines are there and it was like, oh my God, it's not going away, it's really coming through on Zoom land. So yes, absolutely, that's a really big aspect of how it kind of came through, and that might affect some of the questions Anna is raising. And Steve and I, we just did a big survey of part of the Central Valley, in which some of the questions are exactly this. Find out where the meeting was, did you go to it, what were the barriers to you, were the times suitable for you? And we're finding preliminary findings that yes, that was a big barrier. Absolutely. So access and then being able to understand, because groundwater is kind of hard to kind of really wrap your head around, was not easy. So that's a really serious aspect of this.
Yeah, that might be the last one though. We can give the last word to Anita.
You
No, I'm not, I'm just.
So what I'm thinking is, what a potential different approach in which I tell you, you need to cut X%. I don't care about how you do it. It's your problem. I will be taking measurements. I'll check if you are not within these ranges, I take over, and that's it. So it's a more decentralized thing. The local community needs to figure out. The different communities will be figuring out instead of coming with a plan that is kind of problematic, because you can come up with a plan that then doesn't generate any final good outcomes. And then, well, they approve you the plan. The plan could be even, a very bad one. So they're only asking you to come with a plausible plan to deal. So you are not even responsible for the outcomes, no? You are just responsible for coming with a plan.
That's a risky game to play. You could roll the dice on that. Well, let's just come up with something.
Yeah.
Remember, the critically overdrafted basins, their first deadline for evaluation is next year, 2025. They submitted their plans in 2020. 2025 is when the first evaluation is. That
They evaluate.
Just because you're in green now doesn't mean you can't fail later.
And you fail or not according to outcomes.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the state is signaling, we mean business.
Okay, so at the end, it's outcomes, and they are going to be punishing you don't get.
Absolutely right. Maybe it was just like, hey, let's just come up with something for now and let's just pass this barrier. But then they did that, and if they're one of the green ones, and then they don't show any progress in 5 years, which is next year. I think the state is signaling we're serious.
I think that's an interesting problem, how a commons is governed, even from a theoretical point of view, under the threat of government coming and taking over, no? So I don't know. Mike, people have studied those cases. I'm asking you because if you don't know, I don't think anybody knows.
No, I think, I want to make a comment here, is that it's very hard to get the government officials to force communities to self-organize. And that sounds like what the first step, before you even get to this sort of step, is that the self-organization in the stuff that Lynn studied,
Yeah.
that was all bottom up. Nobody told them, you guys got to organize, okay? And here you've got groups that are doing this. And I think you've already got these districts that are organized, okay? So you gotta have a better understanding of the variation among those districts
That's it.
and how many districts are in each of the new GSAs. And how well they coordinate or what the distribution of different actors. So I think right now the focus should be on how's this organization process going? It's not really the water stuff yet. It's, are they having meetings? Are they connecting? Who are the actors that are involved? What's the distribution? How many of these poor farmers with their own wells are those are the ones that are gonna be the hardest probably to organize. And you say you've got a nonprofit group that's sort of trying to look out for their interests, but that's gonna be a variation. But again, even nonprofits can't force communities to self-organize. So that's, I think, the problem here. And in a way, that's gonna go by the wayside once the state government starts saying, okay, you had your chance, now we're gonna do it. So what you've got here is sort of more of a study of how effective is it for a state government to adopt a policy to try to nudge communities to start working together and be nice to each other. Boy, that's gonna be a tough policy. And then you can later on, 10 years from now, you can study whether the state officials did any better job of actually the stuff coming out. But this forced organization, I mean, was there any state assistance with trying to help set up meetings and things like that?
It was,
Okay, and did the different groups take differential advantage of that?
yes, absolutely. There was a Center for Collaborative Governance at Sacramento State, and they were available to help collaborate, create meeting, because this is a completely different skill set. If counties were taking leads, counties were completely new at this. I mean, this was a completely different skill set. There was assistance provided, but again, in order to be able to get assistance, you need to be at a certain level of readiness, which all areas were not.
Right, again, that's the problem.
Exactly.
Can't force them to self-organize.
Oh, absolutely not. So I think you're absolutely right on the districts. I think this is why, and the reason I kind of picked on districts wasn't just that. I think previous work on water markets also showed that basin, the groundwater basin, which basically, if I'm going to speak economist talk, is the locus of externalities. When the water trades happen, that's where the externalities go, and that has been a locus of conflict before. Oh, you sold all your surface water, but that lost all the recharge. Now our stream is dry, and now, no, you shouldn't be. So there has been a history of like the locus of conflict being at the basin and the districts being at odds with other groundwater users. So there has been a history of that. So now, like at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this now actually becoming a formal basin? Now having all these GSAs and these rules, is that going to help resolve some of those conflicts? Because, you know, water, it's very difficult to assign property, private property. Even if you have a surface water right, it's very difficult to assign private property. It's just very difficult to just cut off the cake slices. So at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, are they going to be able to resolve some of those conflicts? Because now they're working under the shadow of GSA, Sigma. So that's exactly, I completely agree with your instinct that districts are well organized. They have huge stakes in the game already. are they gonna take the lead? If they have taken the lead, meeting these deadlines, all right, states keep away from our business. Then what kind of rules showed up?
Because they've already got, they've helped create the problems in the first place, so they're not likely the ones, if they take charge of these new units, to solve the problems.
Or are they gonna
Built
use,
this up.
or absolutely, or are they gonna now use Sigma, right? We're the last remaining seats on the musical chairs.
Yeah.
You're all out.
Exactly right.
So under what?
Brian has a point on this one, maybe. Do you have
Yeah,
30
we're
seconds?
like 5 minutes over. We started a few minutes late. So Brian, go
Yeah.
ahead, man. Then we'll probably wrap up after that.
Okay, yeah, I think this kind of dynamic of state-supported self-governance, but with an or else threat of will come in, actually is a pattern in terms of water governance, both groundwater and surface irrigation water in the US, including Colorado and other states, of a regulatory framework, which is very much this, okay, you can organize yourself. If you don't, we'll come in. And even earlier in California, it was the groundwater basins that were adjudicated, somebody went to court. And then what typically happens in those cases and in surface water again is people realize, wait a minute, if we just get the legal judge's ruling, we may well end up with something that nobody likes because the law doesn't fit well with groundwater. Much better we have a settlement. And Bill's done work and has a nice paper on this. So okay, the legal system basically provides authority to these settlements. And I would think that this has been addressed more generally, because I know when I lived in Florida, was involved in local government land use planning as a citizen side, but I was in the state county that was the very last county in Florida to put in zoning, land use planning. And that was very clearly the state had been pushing and pushing to do it. And then a kind of final threat of, okay, we'll give you a whole bunch of money to pay for consultants to do this and come up with something in 2 years, or else we're going to intervene directly. And it was only at that kind of an extremis that that county finally said, okay, we'll go ahead and put in, land use planning. So the state-supported governance with a threat to autonomy, and then the value of autonomy to people even under threat, I think is a interesting dynamic and process that seems to keep happening.
Good.
Thank you.
Any final thought, Anita, on the way out?
This has been really useful. And I think from your expressions, I could tell you were kind of in the weeds with me, like what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, I'm totally a student of this problem. So I'm sure I missed out a whole bunch of complexity, but just to kind of keep it focused on power issues, I think are really not studied that well. In commons in general and water especially. So I requested, again, don't put it online. This is still at early stages. So we'll see. And I hope you'll have me again to present some of the results at some point.
Be terrific.
Hope so.
Water panel as well. Excellent. Thank you so much, Anita. There's cookies. Don't forget about the cookies.
Sorry, I was thinking of something.
Steve, I saw you.
Hey, guys,
Bye, Steve.
I need some, I can subsidize, I need